We ran into a bug, but we cannot fix it, because we need you to approve the fix, and that actually took a week longer than if we would have just done it ourselves. I do think there's a lot of room for intuition, but in the end of the day, it's still me and my team deciding what actually do we want to test. What's at Agoda, we have a lot of courses, learning and development courses that you need to take, whether you're a new joiner or not, compliance or strategy stuff. So we actually created the Design Systems Bootcamp. So it's a video course, maybe half an hour worth of video material. NPS is another one that we use, which is more sentiment, I guess, just asking how people feel about the system. And so we kind of measure, every line of code, pretty much. By using a design system, you're gonna be much more efficient and much more consistent. I don't know, I think that's overselling design systems a little bit.
Hello and welcome to Design System Masters. Today I have with me Alexander Fandén, and he's a product designer with 10 plus years of experience designing digital products and leading product teams. Currently, he's working as a design systems lead at Agoda, helping the company build better products faster. So let's dive in. Hello, Alexander, and welcome to the Design System Masters podcast. Or let's say that it's not just a podcast because it's a video series where I want to feature the best design system masters, and you're definitely one of them. And I was lucky enough to meet you also in person this summer. I knew that I wanted to talk with you in a video format because you have so much to talk about design systems, and I'm really excited to have you here. So maybe we should start, you work in a really huge company. And just to put things in the context, it would be cool that you mention how big is your design system team, how many teams use your design system, or how many developers, just that people have an understanding what we will talk about then later on.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me, by the way. It's super exciting and fun to see you again. We met in person this summer in beautiful Slovenia, so that was great. Yeah, so I work for Agoda. So Agoda is essentially a hotel booking or travel booking platform, pretty much the leading platform in Asia, part of the bigger Booking Holdings group with Booking.com and Priceline and Kayak and a couple of other companies. And I guess the team over here, the company, I guess we're around 7,000-8,000 people, and within the product team or the design team, I guess we're roughly 60 designers, 70 designers, and we support around 1,000 to 2,000, I think around 1,500 engineers and product people and designers, all in all.
How big is your design system team?
Yeah, so the design systems team at Agoda, we're almost 20 people now. So the team essentially is a mix of designers. I think we're 6 designers right now. We have about 10, 15 developers. We have a product manager for our team as well, which is super helpful. We also have QA. And what else do we have? I think that's pretty much it. We do have a ops team as well that is a very close sister team, and they have accessibility experts and a few more developers working more on Figma plugins and internal tools like that. So so your team is quite big. It's not common to hear that you have 17 people or almost 20 now in design system team. But let's put pause on this. And what led you to design systems? I mean, how did you start your career, and how did you come to Agoda from your early designer age? Yeah, guess going all the way back, my dad installed a cracked version of Photoshop on my computer when I was 9 years old, and that's kind of the first start, glimpse into design in general. And I think throughout my childhood or teenage years, I guess I was sort of glued to the computer and really being in Photoshop all day long, playing around with things designing football jerseys and stuff like that, which was really fun. And then I studied design and communication in high school in Sweden. So essentially we had 3 years where we got to learn the basics of HTML, CSS, 3D, photography, illustration, all kinds of stuff. So I guess that was my first time that I learned code, I guess. I mean, basic HTML and CSS. I think it teaches you a lot about design systems too, or I feel it's closely connected. You learn the sort of semantics and sort of how the code is structured. It makes a lot of sense to see design from that angle when you're designing for digital products, I think. I guess I was just playing around for fun with like JavaScripts and copy pasting stuff and building my own websites as well for fun. So that definitely like super early introduction, I guess, but that was definitely not design systems. I think design systems probably came in a bit later. So essentially I was working as a graphic designer in Sweden after I graduated high school. I dropped out of college because I studied computer science and it was boring, and I got a job offer to work like for the local newspaper as a graphic designer. I had done like an internship there in high school, and like they wanted me back, I guess. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, I dropped out of university and did that instead. But then my best friend, she actually got a job offer in Bangkok in Thailand. So she moved, like she was 19 and she just moved to Thailand. And I was like,
Brave.
so jealous because yeah, super brave. She's like she's grown up on a farm in Sweden. It's like completely opposite. And then like she told me about moving to Thailand. It's like I always traveled when I was younger with my dad, and like I always wanted to live abroad. So she asked me like, do I want to join? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. But I was in a call center, so that was not related to design at all. So I chose to actually quit my job as a designer and to work in a call center in Bangkok. But luckily, like my boss was super supportive. He was like, well, like if you will come back in a few months, like you'll have a job anyway, so just go and explore and have fun. And I was like, okay. So like 2 weeks later, I was actually on a plane and I had quit my job and apartment and got my passport, and I was on my way to Thailand. And at that point, like I worked in a call center for a couple of months. And then kind of on my lunch breaks, I was sort of sketching out some improvements of the internal like support system that we had, some like new features that we could have, like just for fun. But I guess a bit luckily, like one of the the only product manager in the company, he kind of saw that and he was like, oh, you know how to do UI design? I was like, yeah, that's kind of like what I want to do in my life when I'm not in this call center. And she's like, do you want to move over to our team? We don't have any designers in this company. Like, we need someone to do this. So would you mind like shifting over to the product team? And I was like, yeah, for sure. So that kind of randomly happened. And that team, like, essentially was like 10 developers here in Thailand building like Flash products. This was back in the days, like 2012, I guess, when things were built in Flash still. So I helped them to like build Flash products like apartment finders and things like that for the real estate market. Like 3D navigators, you can go inside of the apartments and like look around and change the materials on the walls and floors and stuff.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, like actually pretty advanced, especially being like, I don't know, almost like, 12 years ago, like pretty advanced. Like you could actually configure an entire apartment and all the materials and buy the home in those apps. So it's pretty advanced. But yeah, at that time, like I was also lucky because I was in the team for like half a year, and then my manager got promoted to be like head of the whole department. And he was like, hey, someone needs to take over this product team. Like, Alex, do you want to give it a try and run the team? And I was like 20 years old, and everyone in the team was 25 to 30. I was definitely the youngest, and like I have no idea why they would give me that opportunity. Like I would never do that. But I was just saying yes to every opportunity, I guess. So yeah, I became sort of the team leader of the developers and also like the only designer. So kind of wearing a lot of different hats. And then like back then it was like, okay, we need to like build new versions of these products, and we need to like convert them to HTML because like the iPad launched, and now we have to build it both in Flash and HTML. So at that time, we did these like sprite sheets in Photoshop. So essentially, like these huge image files with all of the buttons and checkboxes and icons and everything. And that was the design system, right? So you would just have that huge file that you will export, and developers kind of place that into the UI. And that time we also had some level of theming because we had different like PNG files for different customers, so that, some customers wanted to have like flat icons with pink buttons, like we would be able to do that as well, but not at all close to what we're doing in design systems like these days. Very, very simple and hacky. But yeah, I think that definitely was the first real chance to build out the entire UI in a more systematic way. And then I think in various projects after that, leading that team for like 5 years, we sort of took that approach to many different projects.
But what led you to that thinking, that you have to systemize? Because usually, probably it's your background because you also did code and you knew that you have to systemize. But on the other hand, most of the designers would go a bit more creative, not really thinking.
Yeah. That's true. I think because I was surrounded by developers in like a majority of my careers, to be honest, like in that team, everyone else was a developer, and they wanted, like in terms of performance, they didn't want to have to load a lot of different images. They wanted to have like one file. And Yeah, I had a really good like senior developer at the time who was sort of mentoring me a little bit too, like helping me out. And I think like that was the best practice at that time. So, yeah, I can't exactly recall why, but it's just definitely made a lot of sense. And especially since we had customers where we needed to like reskin these programs, like we needed to have like a template of some sort that we could sort of export and tweak and change. So it was just the most appropriate way of doing that, achieving that at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, you hacked making the system effective. So
Yeah.
what happened then when you joined Agoda? Were you already in the design system team, or did this happen later on when you joined as a product designer? How did
Yeah.
your career evolve there?
Yeah, exactly. So like at the point I had led that product team for like 5 years, and I was like, I kind of want to focus more on design now. Like it's wearing a lot of different hats was definitely like I learned a lot, but I was like, I want to focus on design. And then this opportunity came up here in Bangkok. So I was like, okay, I will apply as a product designer. And for the first 3 years in Agoda, I was actually designing like the hotel facing sort of products. Like we built an app and a website for all of the different hotels around the world. They can manage prices and availability and promotions and stuff. So I was a product designer, and then I moved over to design some things for our consumer facing app and website as well. I designed like a cart feature. You can like shop hotels and flights and stuff and add them to a shopping cart. I think at that time I was definitely one of the more sort of vocal people in the design org about design systems, like giving a lot of feedback and attending all of the sort of like syncs and suggesting a lot of new ideas to the team. And then like there was this whole like I'll say like app refresh project going on. It was very intensive. Like they did a lot of new work, like trying to develop a new version of the system. And again, like I had a lot of feedback and thoughts and ideas, but I wasn't maybe able to sort of realize them. And at that time, the manager was asking me, hey, like, why don't you just move to the design systems team and like take the lead of that instead? Like we could really use you in the team right now. Like they were pretty overwhelmed. So yeah, then we talked about that for a couple of months, and then I made a move. I think initially I was a bit afraid of like going away from being a product designer into design systems. It felt like there was a perception that design systems are like lesser than a product designer role, kind of. But there was really my passion. I felt like super excited about doing that. I don't know. I've been excited since.
How big was the team in that moment? The design system.
How big was the team? It was already quite big at that time because we've had design systems at Agoda like since 2017, I think. So like it's been around for like it's been around for like 7 years. It was already a very established team with both developers and designers. So yeah, maybe 10, 12 people, not that much smaller than we are today. We've definitely grown, but...
So you didn't have to deal with selling the design system internally?
Actually, like, I think you still need to do that because what I feel is like, at least for us, like design system kind of started back, like, when I joined the company, they started doing it like more as a developer initiative on the web platform. It was not necessarily something that they asked for buy-in. It was just like, we need to make our job easier, so we're just going to do it. And then like they did an app refresh way before that many, many years ago, which like required a focused team to do it. But I think back then they saw it more as like a one-time project or like a one-time effort. So I think getting a team funded, like for design systems, is almost like a constant job for sure. Because what's your
trick? How do you do it? Is it like quarterly based? Do you have some pitch presentations?
I think early on, like definitely we focused a lot. Like, so when I came in, there was still like a lot of new things happening and it was very uncertain what we were going to do next with design systems and everything. I think a lot of education with the senior stakeholders, like I definitely spent a lot of my time preparing like presentations, trying to like figure out how to simplify the concepts and explain them in like a way that like people can understand. And speaking to like product leadership, IT leadership. I think design and IT is kind of easier because they get it. They are the ones actually executing every day. They understand like the pain points. But for product, it can be a little bit more challenging because they're not the executors necessarily that will benefit from the system. So I think we spent a lot of time with like the more senior people in product leadership to explain the value of it, like what does it do. And I think we also like try to really be mindful of the language we use. Like we didn't go in there and like, hey, atomic design is like molecules and atoms. Like we will lose. Like that wouldn't fly. Like that, it just doesn't work. So it's more, okay, like in terms of efficiency, we know that we want to get the most out of all of these smart people that work in this company. How can we allow product people to focus on product problems instead of focusing on like colors and buttons and like details? How do we make those less of distractions? Like our team can help to focus on that, so you guys can continue focusing on building really good products and trying different things. And I think on the quality aspect, because I think those are for us the two benefits, is like the efficiency and quality. On the quality aspect, I think it's like you maybe almost need to compare it to like the brand team or something. It's like, like we have a logo, we have a defined brand. Like no one would come in and like change the logo to pink tomorrow because they don't like it. Like that's very established. People understand there is value in having like one unified voice, and not anyone can just go and change the brand. And I think like design systems is similar. It's kind of like the product adaptation of the brand. Like this is how our brand looks like in a product. And in order to like have that cohesive and feel professional, like we kind of need to have some established patterns and rules and sort of guidelines. And so selling the system, like educating, like getting people to understand what it is, understand the benefits. It just took like probably a year of like regular meetings and selling. But I think once people start to get the concept, we were also very careful to not like keep the sales hat on for too long, because just saying like, oh, it's going to increase efficiency with X%, or it's going to like, I feel like a lot of people say that without proving it. And Agoda, where I work, is like extremely like, I care a lot about data, and like you need to prove your argument. If you're going to say something, you need to show the priors, you need to like back it up with numbers. And you cannot just pull numbers from like the industry or some like annual report somewhere. It needs to be like, at Agoda, how does it make our work more efficient, and how do we increase quality, and why is that something we should be doing, right? So I think taking off the sales hat a little bit and be like, hey, this is what the system can deliver at its, like ideal state. And here are some sort of blockers for us to reach there. Like there's, different trade-offs that we're facing that we think is really hard to make. So what we try to do is to like see ourselves more as an unbiased sort of partner that can speak both for and against the system, and say, hey, here is where the system might actually hinder people to explore like concepts and build things faster. And here are areas where like it probably will speed people up and help. And then actually use the leadership in the company as a sounding board to balance these trade-offs and concepts, and have discussions with them. Hey, should we mandate the system, or should we let it be optional? Should we be very opinionated, or should we like leave it super flexible? More take on the role of explaining what we think the trade-offs with each are, and then having those discussions together and coming to an agreement of what we want to try out and what we're expecting to see as a result. And then we meet again in, a few months or whatever, and see where we're at. And that, I think, has really helped us to get like engagement with leadership that is otherwise maybe not always super involved in design or like details like this. But now I can hear like the chief product officer standing in front of the entire product org and talking about the importance of like using ADS, our design system, and like use the design language, and, like use the building blocks because it's going to do this and that. It's really cool how that sort of happened, but it took a lot of effort, and it's kind of the effort that you need to like bake that into your capacity and think that, hey, we probably need to spend like half of our time, or I don't know, like 30% of our time actually advocating for the system and like bringing these questions to different forums and leadership and stakeholders. And it's not just about sitting down and designing and coding stuff. That's, I think, almost not even the majority of the job.
It's actually like snowball. It's really small in the start, but once people get on board, snowball gets bigger and bigger. But also, if we reflect on past 7 years, because you mentioned that your design system already exists 7 years, technology changed a lot, So probably you had to switch tools, or maybe you changed tools. So what's the situation here? I mean, Figma was not probably in use in that time, and maybe you switched to Figma and then started using design tokens. How do you manage all these technological changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I was involved in like shifting the entire design org to like from Sketch to Figma. That itself was a big project for sure. That's kind of also one reason why I became interested in design systems, being involved in that project. But yeah, where to start? I think when we were like smaller team, a little bit smaller, and like definitely like less mature of a system, the solutions we needed were not as much as now. Like now we're seeing like building the system over time. There's inconsistencies creeping in. How do we keep checks and balances? How do we ensure that it stays consistent over time? It's really a whole different ball game. And I think especially when you go from being like a team that kind of floats under the radar, like a few people might use the system, but most of them don't know what it is. And now it's more or less mandated in our entire product org, like that you need to use design systems. Then like having processes and systems in place for like dealing with requests and collaborating with stakeholders, getting to decisions. Something pretty interesting recently, which definitely got inspired a little bit by you there, like around Airtable, which is something that we've really been starting to using a lot in our team recently. So essentially we saw that like we struggle to make decisions and then log those decisions somewhere. And we came back to like the same topics and started to make different decisions on the same things like over time. So for example, with Airtable, we're actually logging things like the tokens we're using or props and values on components. And then we're sort of linking them to all components and saying, hey, 16 components are using like this property and value combination, and like 20 components use this one. And then like whenever we're going to make a new component or improve, we can like go into that reference list and see, okay, what are we using for different things and which components do we use it for, and what would be appropriate for this new one. Same with like, I don't know, like component sizes, like which sizes do I have for different components and which one should I align to in my new one. So something like Airtable has been incredible. Like it's not used in production for anything like that. It's more like for us to stay aligned and like to visualize like dependencies and log decisions that we have made.
Yeah, to have a complete overview.
Yeah, exactly. We actually built like a roadmap for our components. Like we want to like upgrade our components, and it's like a 1.5 year like roadmap. So we sort of laid out every single component and like estimated like when are we going to work on them, who's the stakeholders, linking to all the requirements and Jira tickets and whatnot. And then we keep track of statuses in there too. Like when something is launched on one platform, we update like in our Airtable. And then we have this automated email that goes out to all the people who are marked as stakeholders on each component. They get an email like 9 a.m. in the morning if there has been an update. So like we can sort of know who to target with that automation. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, I guess the standard stuff, like we use Jira for managing our like work most of the time, Figma, Storybook for our coded components on the web. And we have this documentation tool called Gitbook, which is sort of like Git kind of versioning like of documentation. The problem I think we're having is like maybe we're having a bit too many tools. We can document things in Storybook too. It's not going to be as beautiful, but like it's a bit confusing sometimes for people. Like, do I look in Gitbook? Do I look in Storybook? Should I like... And so we're trying to also consolidate the amount of tools we're using and be a little bit smarter with what we use.
So is Gitbook like a combination of with stories from Storybook and then also adding more guidelines there? Or do you also use Figma and then in Figma you have separate guidelines for designers?
Yeah, so we used to actually have a lot of documentation in Figma. So when I joined the team, we did most of the documentation in Figma. Of course, that was pretty hard for like PMs and engineers to like navigate and find, and it's not searchable. So we moved away from that to Gitbook. Gitbook is essentially just like a documentation tool. It's not built specifically for design systems, but we built the integration with Storybook so we can sort of like iframe different stories in there. The idea was that like that would replace the need to have like to give out Storybook links to anyone. But I guess what we learned was that like there's a lot of technical constraints. We are like behind VPN on our Storybook and a lot of things. So like accessing those things from Gitbook was difficult. So things don't always load. And in the end of the day, it's like we kind of need to have both. And yeah, that's where we're at right now, trying to figure out how we can move to something maybe less sexy, but more functional and easy to find for our consumers so they know where to look. And everyone likes Storybook. I feel like even designers like to go in there and actually click around and test things themselves. Like no one really want to read like, long novels about our components. You just want to try things and see if it works or not. And I think if that's the case, that's what we have to optimize for and give people that experience and make that better instead. So, yeah.
Yeah, this layer of interactivity, I think it's the most beneficial. But yeah, if you need another documentation tool, you need to research and find your best one. But how do you usually then onboard new designers or new developers that come to your team? Or just a new product designer that comes to Agoda? How do they get introduced to the design system world?
Yeah, so what we do, so essentially at Agoda, like we have a lot of like courses, like learning and development courses that you need to take, like whether you're a new joiner or not, like, compliance or strategy stuff. So we actually created the Design Systems Bootcamp. So it's like a video course, like maybe like half an hour worth of video material. And any designer that joins the company will automatically get assigned that course when they join. And then there's like, you go through like, what is the design system? Where can you find everything you need? There's like basics in like responsive design, colors that we use in our design system, how to apply them, typography, a bunch of other stuff. And so that's like, that gives like people a way to definitely get up to speed with the system on their own. Like we really want to try to avoid having too many manual processes for this, because we really need all the time we can have to be designing and building stuff instead of sitting and educating people. So that's why we invested in that. Yeah, I guess that's the first one. We do have like a general Slack channel for questions that anyone can ask things. So like we encourage people, like, if you have a question, if you're unsure, just like send us a message in that channel as well. But yeah, the design system is pretty established. So even if you join a product team, like the rest of the designers in the team would know and guide you like what you need. Yeah.
But you mentioned that it's a mandatory to use the design system. For example, when product designers make new screens for, I don't know, new feature or new idea or new app, are they allowed to use other components and just experiment, or is everything made with the components that already exist and then you test the new idea, feature, app, and you move back?
Yeah, that's like a really interesting question that we're like talking about a lot in our team over like the last year or so. Like, what do we want to do here? But like what it is right now essentially is that anyone who is designing and building things for consumer facing products, like they have to use the design system. It's not a mandate by my team or anything, but it's more like from product leadership and IT and design leadership. That's what they want. So that's definitely the expectation. If they can customize, everyone should definitely use our design language. Like, there's a no-go. Like, if you try to use a custom hex code or like stuff like that, that's gonna get stuck in our linter, both in the Figma handoff and in the code handoff. So that's gonna like be a big flag. But when it comes to components, I find it really hard to define what a component is. Like, for us, it's very intuitive. But when you actually start to like try to define it, and like the border between component and like a composition of a feature is very blurry. So of course we want people to use our components. What we have right now is essentially this sort of design committee where, like, if you're unsure, like you want to do something and there's no component that exactly does that, what you can do is you can like reach out to this committee and say, hey, help me to guide me. Like, I don't know whether I should be going off and building this custom thing with a design language or if there's something better to use in the system. And then that committee is essentially a group of both design system designers like myself, but also product designer from all the different teams. So it's quite unbiased. It's like we sit together and be like, hey, does it make sense to go custom on this? Is there something in the system we should just use? So that's the first decision we're trying to like provide guidance on. And the other decision is, do we see potential in this solution to become a design system component in the future? And if we do, we encourage them to submit a request for it so we can log it in our system. But oftentimes what happens, because we want to be really pragmatic as well and we don't want to block teams, so what happens is, like, if they really want something that doesn't exist, just go ahead and build it using design language for now, but submit a request so we can capture it and like we can see down the line if there's an opportunity to build it.
But do you hold these design committee meetings on a regular basis and then you decide based on the resources you need to have to implement this new idea or new component?
Yeah, we have like 2 times a week. We meet up actually to discuss these things, but we also have like async on Slack, like a channel where as much as we can just like come to a consensus in that channel, because we get pinged like when there's a new request, like, so we can just talk about it there and try to decide next steps, which is kind of nice because then we can also get the product manager and engineers and everyone can be involved in that discussion if we need to. But yeah, we do meet up regularly for this because people do want to experiment and try a lot of things at Agoda. We're on so many different experiments all the time. So we definitely don't like, we don't want to block people too much from doing things, but at the same time, like we're pretty strict with what goes into the system. So there definitely needs to be like a middle layer where people can try things out. And we're still figuring out what's the best way of like doing that in a more systematic way. Yeah.
But I would assume that it's hard. You probably measure everything. And then on the other hand, you don't know what would happen with metrics if you suddenly change a component or the look and feel.
Yeah, exactly. The way we work is like we A/B test everything. There is nothing that goes live on any of our platforms without we're doing like rigid testing first. And as a design system, that's actually very challenging because like even like changing like our color palettes to become accessible is something we have been iterating on for like almost the past year, actually, to get to a point like where the colors are passing, but they're also like at least not hurting the business and, showing good numbers. That's like, or like an icon, want to change an icon, then we run that as an experiment. And the same goes for all the feature teams, right? So actually, that's a pretty good way to sort of fence things from getting into the system because we can say, hey, we're not confident that this thing should be in the system right now, but if you build it and test it out, like send us the experiment results. And, like we'll capture that evidence for later. And many times it's like, well, they tried something and it didn't work out for some reason, or they ended up not building it at all. They deprioritized that because they're like, nah, we don't want to build this. If the design system cannot do it for us for free, then we don't see the value in it. And that's great for us because like then we avoided building something that wasn't that important. So I think there is pros and cons with being that rigid in testing everything. Definitely can be frustrating at times because you're trying to build like a systematic kind of system. And then when there are inconsistencies and you want to fix them, you're like, well, it's very challenging because like when we try to fix them, they might not produce a flat experiment or a result that we can integrate. And then you need to try something new. So, yeah.
So there's no place for subjectivity in your business.
I mean,
is there a time where you can use your intuition, for some, let's say, for components, or then you push them? Or is also every component that you introduce tested before it goes live?
So what we can do, I do think there's a lot of room for intuition in the sense that like it's still the designers who decides what we should be testing, right? So it's still me and my team deciding, like, for example, recently we were like trying out some things with our buttons. The secondary buttons is like, should we have like blue borders or should they be like subtle gray? And should the text be bold or should it be regular? And we were on a couple of different experiments, but in the end of the day, it's still me and my team deciding like, what actually do we want to test? What's the hypothesis? Like, do we think that making the text bold in the button is going to drive more clicks? Is it going to drive too many clicks and maybe take away focus for our primary action? So, okay, let's make the border less blue and more subtle and balance that out a little bit. And then we can test that experiment, right? So I still think that there's lots of room for coming up with an idea and proving that idea. And you actually get some numbers on it, which is pretty nice. But when it comes to building new stuff, like if we're going to build a new component, because our team, we usually don't integrate stuff on the products. We're building our storybooks, we're like building components, and then it's actually the first team that uses it that will run the experiment. So like just to launch components, new stuff, like that's pretty fine. We can do that. And then we can get feedback from the product teams that integrate it. If there's bugs, if there's issues, if for some reason they're not happy, and then we can improve it then. But especially when you're updating something that already exists, we're going to upgrade our input fields. They're everywhere. Then we'll need to run the experiments in our team across all the platforms and make sure that we fix everything. And I guess in a way, it's really good because it kind of adds a layer of security that we will immediately see if there's any big bugs or any unexpected issues. We can track that on every single page, every single interaction, and see, if there's any anomalies and fix them before they go out to all the teams. So it's an interesting layer of complexity for sure that many teams don't necessarily have to think about when you roll things out.
So do you also measure the adoption of components and also like how many components are used in each team? Because I would assume that teams are different or based on the business side.
Yeah, we do. We have lots of like different measurements, but I think the main ones that we care about a lot is something we call like active adoption. So Like, I guess when I joined the team, we're looking a lot on code-based adoption, and we're like, we're going to increase code-based adoption by X, Y, Z. Then what we realized is like, this is really hard because none of it is in our hands. Like whether like certain parts of our website or app, like it's going to be improved, it's really up to the product teams. You know, there are pages that people are not working on right now. So no matter how hard we try to sell the system, there's still no one there like trying to like improve it in that area. So the code-based adoption, like, it's going to increase kind of slowly but steadily. So instead, we look at active adoption. So this is essentially month on month, how much of all of the code that is contributed into our live products is using our system. So we kind of measure like, I guess, every line of code pretty much to see if there is like design systems or not. And then we try to, like, our metric is to like keep that at 100% on both our apps and our web. That is like, actually, we've been doing that on the app pretty consistently this year, but on the web, it's been like between like 88 and 97%, something like that. And it's not that like we're failing as a team if we don't meet it, but it's more like we should assume that our system is good enough that everyone can use it. And when it's not, we want to have some data to look at to see why it's, you know, why doesn't it meet the bar? So what we do with this, when we see that like a certain team perhaps didn't use the system, like we can see that in the data, we can see like which developer, which team. It's not like we go there and like tell them off. It's more like asking them like, hey, what was the reason like we didn't use the system? And many times, like oftentimes it's actually valid. It's like, well, we're just moving like a big block of code from one file to another and like, you know, cleaning up stuff. We had no intention of actually changing anything. And that's okay, that's fine. And sometimes it's down to like education, like they were just maybe not aware yet that this existed or there was a component. And then that's a good opportunity for us to like let them know that, oh, okay, next time this is where you can find things and you can reach out to us. So that one is important. We measure it monthly. NPS is another one that we use, which is more like sentiment, I guess, like just asking how people feel about the system and does it support their needs? Is it like blocking them? Like, do they know where to find things? Do they know where to ask or request things? Are they getting things fast enough? And so we ask like 10 to 20 questions every quarter. And then we look at like the quarter-on-quarter results and see where like the trends are going. So for example, we invested a lot in this designer bootcamp, like the video materials like last year, because we saw that like the comprehension of the system was pretty low within the design org because it was a new system. We had just introduced a new version and there was a lot of fast-paced development. So people struggled to get up to date with it. So we invested in that bootcamp and now we can see that like the sort of comprehension amongst the designers and education, like that scores like really high now. Like it started with like minus something like in the beginning of the year, and it's been going up to like 76 or something in our NPS score now. So it's very high. On the other hand, we can see on the engineering side, it's been pretty stable because we haven't done as much education efforts to our developers yet. So it's pretty cool to see like that the things we're doing to fix, we can actually go and measure and see that they actually had the result that we were hoping for.
So then based on their feedback, you also prioritize in the trainings or other educational materials.
Yeah, exactly. Like we can get feedback on like, for example, the bootcamp. Okay, like the material was great for the designers. Where education has stalled a little bit on developers and PMs. So now we're like looking at building more material catered to those two functions so that we can have a bootcamp for all three. And in some cases, we get really good feedback in those surveys. Like, it's great, but like, I don't understand how like to build responsive designs with ADS. And then, okay, like now we're adding a module about that too. So that next time around, hopefully no one's going to complain about that. It's going to be covered.
We use some kind of tool for all these questions and then also for the answers where they can also search later on. Or is this like one-on-one meeting?
No, like the NPS is like a simple, like I think like a Microsoft form or Google form or something. It's very basic.
Yeah, for the NPS it's fine. But for example, if I give you the feedback that I don't know how to use a responsive design, do you reach out to this person and then go one-on-one with him or her through?
It depends. Like if like many times like the feedback we get is very valid, and like actually oftentimes is like a known things that like, yeah, we know that this is a problem, we just haven't been able to prioritize it. But like it depends what kind of problem it is. If it's an actual like design system, like a feature problem maybe, or like something missing, we do always encourage people to submit a request, because that way we can actually like see what's the sort of appetite for those things in the system. And if we get like multiple requests for the same or similar feature, then we know that like this is probably like a pretty common problem that we should be solving. We do want to try like identifying like who's just being like loud and complaining versus like what's actually a real problem. But so we don't always act on like the first sort of like feedback. Like we sometimes like if it's something new that is sort of like shocking for us, then we definitely prefer to like hear it at least from a few people. And you know, because even we're a pretty well-funded team, I think in the grand scheme of things, we're still like have so much work to do, like way more work to do than we can possibly get through. Like we always have 5 times more requests on our Jira board than we're able to resolve. So it's like, if we could have like 100 people in our team, that would be great. No, actually, no, that would not be great. That would be horrible. That would be hard to manage. But yeah.
But what's the hardest thing for you when building a design system or leading a team? What would you say gives you a pressure? I mean, you're really driven and curious, but still.
Hardest thing, I feel like there's so many challenges. Prioritizing things is very hard because you're gonna like upset a lot of people or disappoint a lot of people, and things always take a long time. I think it's really hard. Like you're trying to solve things like at the scale of an entire product. You have a lot of conflicting feedback. You have a lot of different stakeholders with different needs, and you're trying to like figure out how to build something scalable. It takes time, and I think it's really hard to match sort of like when can we deliver something versus when people need it. It's always going to be like too late. So that's really hard. Like we're trying to figure out how we can like balance the sort of like long-term stability of the system and improving the foundations and doing things holistically versus like being pretty active and like responding to, you know, like requests and trying to solve things when people need them. Like, but finding that balance is very hard. And it's really hard to like keep the team sort of shield the team from having to do so many different things and context switching all the time. And when you grow larger, especially when adoption takes off and like everyone is using the system, like there's just so much that you could be doing, like answering questions, writing better documentation, helping out with contributions, or like building and designing things. I don't know how to pick, Romina. I think like design systems is very challenging. It's, you know, extremely hard to pick one thing, but I think they're all very exciting problems. The one thing that feels a bit like, I wouldn't say nice, but I try to talk to other like design system leaders in other companies. Like I have like an open calendar that people can schedule things with me. So doing that like comforts me in a way to hear that like even like very big and, you know, seasoned systems having a lot of similar challenges, you know, around supporting people and, you know, context switching, or like, should we be like flexible or should we be super opinionated? Like this seems to be an ever-evolving conversation. And the more we learn, like the answer kind of keeps changing a little bit and we have to adapt. So, yeah, hard to say.
Do you think AI can solve some of the problems? Or how do you see design systems in the future? I mean, AI will not solve the people's problems and challenges, but still a lot of repetitive tasks. Or how do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, some parts at least, like a lot of the busy work that we're doing, like when we know what we want to build and we know like we have all these decisions already made, like it's a system, right? We know what sizes to use, what border radiuses, colors, what functionality to have. Like, I feel like the process from going to having the sort of specs kind of ready to having the actual component ready is very long and like tedious, and bugs and things you need to fix. Like that would be great if that can be optimized, and I think it will. I would much rather see us being sort of like the conductors of the I don't know, like rules maybe, like of the system. Like, hey, we're defining a rule and then we test it out and see how that sort of transpiles down like into the system and what's the side effects. And then you keep tweaking those different rules and sort of like that. I know like Token Studio, for example, like we don't use it right now, but we're looking into it. And I think they're building something there where you can sort of like link dependencies and link things, and it's like apply this on top of this on top of this.
Yeah, graph resolver.
Kind of how you build. Yeah, exactly. The graph resolver, like that stuff, I think is definitely one thing that I think systems could be using a lot more of. Less mundane task, but I think there's more things like being able to identify new patterns like in the code base. Like that would be interesting, not just by looking at the code, but like maybe the sort of yeah, like in a smarter way, being able to see that, hey, there's actually like this, and that pattern that you guys haven't like systemized yet. Let's do it. Maybe like design reviews for like product designers is one thing where like we're building like our own plugin for that now, like a linter in Figma. And, like it looks for like design system mistakes and stuff like that. That would be great to solve a bit more with AI, having something that
just
can
using and combining, for example, in your case, the metrics that exist and conversion rates, and then also on the other hand, suggesting designers which components can they merge together or combine as patterns, or somehow create templates based on all the stuff that's going on live.
Like that's one thing for art, like for the design system team, I think like being able to identify patterns in Figma files or in code and like sort of like highlight that and suggest things, that would be great. For product designers, I think like maybe even like being able to like do like a napkin sketch or like just come up with a rough concept in Figma and like just let the AI like just take care of the rest, like fix the tokens and correct things. Like that would be like, I mean, that's, I think pretty soon we'll have that. That's not like a long-term feature thing. That's very soon. Like a middleman essentially between the delivery and the designer that just comes in and helps. That would be great.
Names all the tokens and then just pushes the idea.
Yeah, like exactly. Like a lot of the solutions we do now, like with tokenizing things, it's very complex and like it sounds easy on the surface, but the more you like dive into it, you realize it's actually very hard. And hopefully in a few years from now, it's very unnecessary. Like there can be smarter ways of doing that than what we do now, but it's just hard to visualize what that might look like. But I think I'm someone who is like very excited about AI and stuff. Like not like a fanboy excited, but more like, hey, there's a lot of boring stuff that like maybe we don't have to do anymore. And, I think if you're working on a design system, like, yeah, just being like behind the sparks and like leading the train forward, like telling which direction to go. And then like the AI can like do the heavy duty lifting. That would be great. I don't think it's going to put ourselves out of a job necessarily. So, yeah.
No,
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But I still see us guiding the stuff here, not just
exactly
going on the train and doing nothing.
Yeah, definitely.
So, in your opinion, what are the most overrated and underrated aspects of design system?
Underrated, like something very nerdy that is underrated within the design systems, maybe like naming conventions and stuff like that. How like little things like naming can have very big consequences on how people comprehend the system and use it correctly and like understand it. I think that's a very interesting part that like it's easy to overlook, especially in the beginning, because you're like, that's not the first thing to solve and you don't know like how to name it until you have an entire system and you realize like all of the problems. So that's interesting, but I think underrated, maybe the methodology of like the way of thinking and building products. I think it's something that really a lot of other product teams could do. Like, for example, like Storybook. And it's a quite nice thing to have even for a product team to like document their own, like page headers or feature, like things that, can be shareable, but they're definitely not systems, like design systems level components. Just getting into the habit of documenting stuff, showcasing work, sharing it with others, building upon each other's work and improving it rather than like going into silos and doing different things. There's a lot of opportunity there. I guess some teams are really acing that, but I think many people I talk to is like, the bigger the organization, the harder it is to not get siloed. So like finding methods to break those silos and learn from each other's learnings and improve things, it's really something that design systems kind of are trying to do, and others can maybe learn from that. Overrated. What's overrated with design systems? I think, to be honest, maybe this is a hot take, but like the idea like of like, yeah, like by using a design system, you're gonna be like much more efficient and much more consistent. Like, I don't know, like I think that's overselling design systems a little bit. Like hopefully that like that happens, but I think throwing that around like it's kind of like buzzwordy a little bit for me. I feel like we have done that too. We've been going and telling our stakeholders it's gonna be more consistent, oh, it's gonna be like faster, and they're like, oh, actually we ran into a bug. but we cannot fix it, like, because we need you to approve the fix. And that actually took a week longer than if we would have just done it ourselves. This actually didn't make it faster at all. Like, it made it slower. Like, I think there are a lot of those things where, like, we need to be a bit more humble, maybe, as a design system industry, and a bit more, like, see ourselves or, like, what we do with a more critical lens, and really go back and think about, like, the design systems itself is kind of like just one way of trying to get efficiency and quality gains in a company. And I'm sure there are like 10 other ways you can also do that. And it doesn't have to be a design system. And it definitely doesn't have to follow like a prefixed templates of, you know, like these components and those tokens. I think it's really, you need to really do it within the context of the company you work for, the problems they are facing, and how you can be helpful. I think that has been a bit of a misconception around design systems. That, like, you download a UI kit and apply it, and that's it, you're done. I think that's like, yeah, not the big problem.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, that people think that once you replicate other recipes, that you will just be successful and everything will work. Or just copy the design tokens that exist and naming conventions, but you don't actually think about foundations. And then later on, after 3 months or 6 months, you realize, oh my God, this is not us. It's not what we need. And yeah, I definitely agree that you might need more time, and it's hard then to change the structure of the design system and the process again. But what's one piece of advice that you would give people when they start building a design system, or just like in general?
I'm gonna sound like everyone else who gets this question, and it's probably to like try to understand like what actually is the biggest blocker of, you know, quality and efficiency in your team or in the product team. Like how, like, yeah, like where can you come in and be of help to begin with? Because I think it's really hard to, I think we kind of been learning the hard way to, like, you build a system and then you try to like force feed that system to everyone, and like people don't like that because people want to be involved and they want to feel like, you know, so yeah, I think definitely taking the approach of like learning from the people you're gonna serve, like what are the things you need, and then start from there. Like I said before, I think involving the leadership team like right away, you know, in education, and then using them as a sounding board for tricky trade-offs and questions, because then like it's not like, oh, the design system decided that we're gonna be like super strict with everything. No, it's like it was a conversation over time with leadership where we considered trade-offs, and we decided to test this out as a collective. It was not like one team in a corner like deciding something and pushing it out to everyone else. It was like kind of consensus almost, that I think really can help in the long term.
So, do you have your favorite book about design systems, or your favorite podcast, or anything that you would refer that people can learn more?
That's a good question. I'm just bad at remembering like the names. There is like a design system book with a red cover. I don't remember the name of it, but it was really good. I remember.
Do you mean the one from Anna Kolmatova?
That is probably correct, yes. I do listen to a lot of podcasts and stuff. I'm trying to always find like new design systems podcasts, but I guess same there. What is it called? Office Hours or something like that? Design System Office Hours.
Yeah, from Davey and PJ.
Yeah, I think it's great because I think they're really, almost every time they're touching on subjects that are like, oh my God, how did they know that this was like the problem that I'm trying to solve right now with my team? It's like, it's nice. It's very relatable, I think. So that's one I can really recommend it for sure. If you're going to pick one.
I will link both of them. And yeah, the book is Design Systems, and it was actually published from Smashing Magazine.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a new one by Dan Moll, but I haven't like got to read it yet, so I can't say. But yeah.
What about what you're doing when you're not in design systems? Are you also heavily involved in design, or what's your favorite hobby?
Outside of work, you mean?
No, outside of work.
At work.
No, I mean that outside of work. Yeah, but I'm just joking that probably work a lot.
I don't know. I'm like, Yeah, well, I feel like I've become a bit boring, I guess, over the last few years. I like skiing, but like that's very seasonal. And like if you live in Thailand, you like it's not something you can do every week. That's like one time a year. Scuba diving, I used to do quite a lot before, but like both of them are things you cannot do every day. I'm very passionate and interested about design in general. Like I always been, like since I was young. So like I like reading a lot, listening to podcasts, yeah, I'm pretty basic these days. Just going to a cafe, bringing my iPad, like reading like some new articles in my RSS feed and getting a coffee. And yeah, that's it. That's my life.
Nice.
When I don't
So
travel,
what's your
I guess.
favorite since you moved to Thailand, and what's your favorite place there, or favorite beach? Probably people don't know Thailand so much.
Yeah, I think there's an island called Koh Lipe. It's in the south. It's a bit hard to get to. You need to like fly there, and you need to take like a 1.5 hour bus, and then you take a boat. But like it's really beautiful. I like the islands here that are like smaller. That's especially if they don't have any roads. I think that's amazing. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. Really good diving, snorkeling, good beaches, nice places to stay. There's so many places in Thailand, like Chiang Mai, like that's probably the second biggest city in Thailand in the north. And I would say during December, it's really nice. I typically go there for like a few weeks with my friends every December. It's become like a ritual because the weather is kind of like normal. Most of the year, like Thailand is like so hot, like way too hot. But during that time, it's kind of like a European, like Swedish summer almost. And they have a lot of good coffee shops, beautiful like old city, and a lot of like design and arts and stuff like that. So yeah, just going up there.
That's two cool recommendations. And where can people find you? Because you also mentioned that you have an open calendar where you meet people regularly.
Yeah,
Where
I
can
think
they
like
book?
I guess first reach out to me on LinkedIn, add me, don't be a stranger, and you know like yeah, like I said, like I always think it's really nice to speak to other passionate design system leaders in other companies to understand like what's going on. So just reach out, and I'm happy to send a link over, and we can book a time slot.
Oh, nice. I'm sure people will learn a lot about you from this talk. And also, if you haven't seen yet, Alexander was also on this year's Into Design System conference. And I will also link the video where you talked about prioritization and your process at Agoda in details. So, yeah, really cool talk. And thanks for your time today. It was really exciting, and you always have so many interesting things to say and valuable insights. And I'm sure that people will love and apply some stuff in their own environment.
Yeah, it's really great talking to you again, Romina, and yeah, thanks for having me. Such an awesome opportunity to talk design systems with other design system nerds. My favorite thing to do.
And you will record it, that's the best thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.